You know that friend who always cancels plans? The one who's sick again, tired again, maybe next time? Yeah, that friend isn't avoiding you. They're protecting something. If you're someone who genuinely gets more excited about a Friday night in pajamas than a Friday night out, welcome. You're about to feel very seen. And today we're breaking down the psychology of people who love staying at home. The one society calls boring, but science calls something else entirely. Here's the thing: extroverts recharge by being around people. Their energy comes from the noise, the movement, the chaos. But introverts and people who prefer solitude, they recharge in stillness. Every social interaction, even a fun one, slowly drains their battery. And home is the only charger that actually works. Psychologists call this optimal arousal theory. Some people need more stimulation to feel good, others need less. It's not laziness or fear, it's just how their nervous system is wired. But there's more going on than just introversion. Some people love staying home because their environment gives them a sense of control they don't get anywhere else. Out there, the world is unpredictable. Loud strangers, last minute changes, small talk with people who don't care about your answer. But at home, you control the lighting, the noise, the vibe. For people with anxiety or high sensitivity, that control isn't a luxury, it's survival. Here's something wild. Studies show that people who enjoy solitude tend to be more creative, more introspective, and better at problem solving. Staying home isn't doing nothing. It's where the best ideas are born, not in a crowded bar, but in a quiet corner with a book or a thought spiral at 2 a.m. And let's be honest, society romanticizes being out there. The influencers, the party pics, the live your best life culture. But what if your best life is a documentary, some soup, and zero obligations? That's not sad. That's self awareness. Now, some people stay home for a darker reason: social anxiety, past trauma, depression that quietly whispers, what's the point? And for them, home becomes both a refuge and a cage. So it's important to know, do you stay home because it fills you up or because leaving feels too heavy? Because one is peace, the other is hiding. But for those who truly love staying home, they're not missing out. They're just living differently. They find joy in small rituals, the morning coffee routine, the favorite spot on the couch, the way the light hits the room at sunset, things most people rush past. Psychologists say this is called low stimulation preference. These people don't need the world to entertain them. Their inner world is rich enough. So, if you're someone who turns down invitations without guilt, who feels genuinely happy on a solo Saturday, who'd rather rewatch your comfort show than make memories, you're not broken. You're just wired for depth over noise, for peace over performance. But let's go deeper, because there's a reason you clicked on this video, and it's probably not just curiosity. Somewhere along the way, someone made you feel like your preference for home was a problem. Maybe it was a parent who kept pushing you to go outside and make friends. Maybe it was a partner who took your need for alone time personally. Maybe it was a culture that kept telling you happiness lives outside your front door and you've been quietly wondering why you never found it there. Let me tell you something that might change the way you see yourself. The world is designed for extroverts, the open office plans, the networking events, the team building exercises, the constant pressure to be on, to be social, to be available. And if you don't thrive in that world, you start to believe the problem is you. But the problem was never you. The problem is a society that confused one way of being with the only way of being. Think about it. From the moment you entered school, you were graded on participation, not on the quality of your thoughts, but on how often you raised your hand. You were told group projects build character, even though you did your best work alone. You were taught that leaders are loud, that success is visible, that the quiet kid in the corner must be struggling. And maybe you believed it. Maybe you spent years trying to fit into a mold that was never designed for your shape. But here's what no one told you. Some of the most brilliant minds in history were people who preferred solitude. Einstein said, The monotony and solitude of a quiet life stimulates the creative mind. Newton discovered gravity while isolating during a plague. Darwin spent years alone on a ship thinking. Nikola Tesla, famously reclusive. These weren't people who needed a crowd to feel alive. They needed silence. They needed space. They needed the kind of stillness that most people run from. And here's where it gets interesting. Research from the University of Buffalo found that not all solitude is created equal. There's a difference between being alone because you're avoiding something and being alone because you genuinely enjoy it. The first one they called social withdrawal. It's driven by anxiety, by fear, by a belief that you're not good enough to be around others. But the second one they called unsociability. And unsociability is not a disorder, it's a preference. People who are unsociable aren't afraid of others. They're not hiding. They simply find more satisfaction in their own company. And contrary to what you might expect, these people don't have higher rates of depression or anxiety. In fact, they often have better emotional regulation, more stable moods, and a stronger sense of identity because they're not constantly looking outside themselves for validation. They've built a relationship with themselves that most people never take the time to develop. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you sat with yourself, truly sat with yourself, without music, without your phone, without something filling the silence? For most people, that sounds terrifying. They'll do anything to avoid being alone with their own thoughts. But for people who love staying home, that silence isn't empty, it's full. It's where they process, where they create, where they understand themselves in ways that constant noise would never allow. There's a concept in psychology called the default mode network. It's a system in the brain that activates when you're not focused on the outside world, when you're daydreaming, reflecting, imagining, thinking about the future, the past. And here's the thing, this network is essential for creativity, for empathy, for understanding your own emotions, but it only activates when you have space. When you're constantly stimulated, constantly surrounded, constantly engaged, your brain never gets a chance to turn inward. People who love staying home give their brain that chance. They're not wasting time. They're doing the kind of internal work that most people never prioritize. They're building self-awareness. They're processing emotions. They're connecting dots that scattered attention would never allow. Now, I want to address something important because there's a difference between loving solitude and using solitude to escape. And it's a line that can blur if you're not careful. Healthy solitude feels like a choice. It feels like coming home to yourself. It feels restorative, peaceful, even exciting. You look forward to your alone time, not because you're dreading the alternative, but because you genuinely enjoy it. But unhealthy solitude feels like hiding. It feels heavy. It's driven by fear, by shame, by a voice that says you're too much or not enough. When you avoid people, not because you don't want to see them, but because you're convinced they don't want to see you, that's not preference. That's pain. And that pain deserves attention. It deserves healing. It deserves more than a locked door. So if you're watching this and you're not sure which one you are, here's a question to ask yourself. If all your fears disappeared, if you knew for certain that people liked you, that you wouldn't be judged, that nothing bad would happen, would you still choose to stay home? If the answer is yes, congratulations. You're not avoidant. You're just someone who knows what they like. But if the answer is no, if you realize that fear is what's keeping you inside, then this video isn't permission to keep hiding. It's an invitation to start healing. Because you deserve connection too. You deserve to feel safe in the world, not just in your room. But for those of you who genuinely, deeply, authentically prefer staying home, let me tell you why that's not just okay. It's valuable. In a world that never stops talking, people who can sit in silence are rare. In a world obsessed with external achievement, people who cultivate inner richness are needed. In a world where everyone is performing, people who are content without an audience are revolutionary. Let's talk about what actually happens in the brain of someone who prefers solitude, because it's not what most people think. A lot of people assume that introverts or homebodies have less active brains, that they're somehow less engaged with life. But the opposite is true. Research using brain imaging has shown that introverts have more blood flow to the frontal lobes, the areas responsible for planning, thinking ahead, and problem solving. Their brains are more internally focused, processing information more deeply rather than more widely. And this is why introverts often feel overwhelmed in busy environments. It's not that they can't handle it, it's that they're handling too much. Every sound of every face, every conversation is being processed at a deeper level, and that depth takes energy. Extroverts, on the other hand, process information more quickly and superficially. They can handle more stimulation because they're not analyzing it as intensely. This isn't better or worse, it's just different. But it explains why a party that energizes one person completely drains another. It's not about being antisocial, it's about having a brain that works differently. And once you understand that, you stop trying to fix something that was never broken. There's also the role of dopamine. Extroverts have a more active dopamine reward system. They get bigger hits of pleasure from external rewards, from new experiences, from social interactions. Introverts have a less active dopamine system, which means they don't need as much stimulation to feel satisfied. In fact, too much stimulation can actually feel unpleasant, like eating when you're already full. This is why extroverts are always chasing the next thing, the next party, the next adventure. They need it. But introverts can find deep satisfaction in the same book, the same room, the same quiet evening. They're not lacking something, they're just already full. Now, let's talk about society's obsession with being busy because there's a reason staying home feels almost rebellious. We live in a culture that glorifies productivity, that measures worth by output, that sees rest as laziness and stillness as stagnation. Hustle culture tells you to sleep when you're dead. Social media tells you to live your best life. And somehow that life is always out there, always moving, always visible. But what if the best life isn't the loudest one? What if the best life is the one that actually feels good to live? People who love staying home have opted out of the performance. They've stopped trying to prove their worth through activity. They've stopped chasing experiences just to have something to post. They've found something that most people are still looking for: contentment, not happiness that depends on circumstances, not joy that requires an audience, but a quiet, steady peace that exists regardless of what's happening outside. And that's not something to pity, that's something to protect. Let me tell you about a study that might surprise you. Researchers at Harvard found that the average person spends almost 50% of their waking hours thinking about something other than what they're doing. And they found that this mind wandering almost always made people less happy, not more creative, less happy. But here's the catch: that study was done on people who were forced to be alone, people who were waiting, who were bored, who didn't choose their solitude. When people choose to be alone, when they have activities they enjoy, when they actually like their own company, the results are completely different. Chosen solitude is associated with increased creativity, better emotional regulation, and yes, greater happiness. The key word is chosen. When you're home because you want to be, not because you have no other option, solitude becomes a gift instead of a sentence. Let's talk about relationships for a second, because one of the biggest misconceptions about people who love staying home is that they don't value connection, that they're cold, distant, incapable of intimacy. But the opposite is often true. People who prefer solitude tend to have fewer relationships, but deeper ones. They don't spread themselves thin trying to maintain dozens of friendships. They invest heavily in a small circle, and those relationships are often more meaningful, more honest, more intimate than the wide social networks of more extroverted people. Think about it. If you're constantly surrounded by people, you're constantly managing impressions. You're performing, you're adapting to different groups, different contexts, different expectations. But when you have fewer relationships, you can show up more fully in each one. You can be yourself without the exhaustion of constant social navigation. You can go deep instead of wide, and depth is where real connection lives. People who love staying home are also often better listeners because they're not waiting for their turn to talk. They're not filling silence with noise. They're comfortable in the pauses and the space between words. And that space is where people feel truly heard. So if you've ever been told you're a great listener, if people tend to open up to you, if you find yourself holding other people's secrets, it's probably because your comfort with silence makes others feel safe. Now let's address the guilt, because I know a lot of you feel it. The guilt of saying no, the guilt of canceling, the guilt of preferring your couch to someone's birthday party. That guilt is real, and it comes from a good place. It comes from caring about people, from not wanting to hurt anyone, from knowing that your absence is noticed. But here's what I want you to understand: you are not obligated to attend every event you're invited to. You are not a bad person for having limits. You are not selfish for knowing what you need. The people who truly love you will understand. They'll learn that your no isn't rejection. It's just honesty. And the people who can't accept that, the people who take your boundaries personally, they were never honoring who you really are. They were honoring the version of you they wished you were. Saying no is not abandonment. It's not cruelty. It's not even always about them. Sometimes it's just about you, about protecting your energy, your peace, your ability to show up when you do show up. Because here's the truth: a forced yes is worse than an honest no. When you drag yourself to something you don't want to attend, you're not fully there anyway. You're counting down the minutes. You're performing enthusiasm. You're physically present, but emotionally absent. And people can feel that. They'd rather have your genuine presence occasionally than your hollow presence constantly. So here's permission you might have been waiting for. It's okay to stay home. It's okay to need more alone time than other people. It's okay to feel your best in your own space. It's okay to not want what everyone else seems to want. You're not missing out. You're just choosing differently, and that choice is valid. Let me tell you something about the concept of missing out. FOMO, the fear of missing out, has become this cultural phenomenon. Everyone's worried about what they're not doing, what they're not seeing, what experiences are happening without them. But there's another concept that doesn't get nearly enough attention: JOMO, the joy of missing out. JOMO is the pleasure of knowing something is happening and being genuinely happy you're not there. It's looking at your phone, seeing everyone's stories from the party, and feeling grateful you're in your pajamas. It's understanding that not every experience is for you, and that's not a limitation. It's wisdom. Because here's the truth about experiences: they're not all equally valuable. A night out that leaves you drained isn't more meaningful than a night in that leaves you restored. A social event where you felt uncomfortable and invisible isn't better than a solo evening where you felt content and whole. The quality of an experience isn't determined by how many people were there. It's determined by how you felt during and after. And if your most fulfilling moments happen in solitude, those moments are no less real than anyone else's crowded memories. There's something else I want to mention, something that people who love staying home often know but rarely say out loud. Solitude is where you meet yourself. And for many people, that's terrifying. When you're constantly surrounded by others, you can avoid yourself. You can distract yourself from thoughts you don't want to think, feelings you don't want to feel, questions you don't want to answer. But in solitude, there's nowhere to hide. You're faced with who you actually are, your insecurities, your dreams, your fears, your desires. And that can be uncomfortable, but it's also how you grow. People who love staying home have made peace with themselves in a way that many people never do. They've sat with their own darkness. They've explored their own minds. They've built a relationship with themselves that doesn't depend on external validation. And that's not isolation, that's integration, that's becoming whole. Let's talk about creativity for a moment, because there's a direct line between solitude and creative output. Almost every creative person throughout history has emphasized the importance of alone time. Writers need silence to hear their characters. Artists need space to see their visions. Musicians need stillness to hear the melodies in their head. Creativity doesn't happen in chaos, it happens in the gaps between chaos. When the world finally quiets down, the ideas have room to surface. If you're someone who stays home and you've ever wondered why your brain is always creating, always imagining, always building worlds that don't exist, it's because you've given it the space to do so. Your solitude isn't empty, it's a canvas. And everything you'll ever create starts in those quiet hours when no one's watching. There's a concept called incubation in creativity research. It's the idea that creative breakthroughs often happen when you're not actively working on a problem. When you step away, when you rest, when you let your subconscious do the heavy lifting. And guess where incubation happens best? In solitude, in the shower, on a quiet walk, in the middle of the night when you can't sleep. People who love staying home are constantly incubating, they're processing, connecting, creating, even when it looks like they're doing nothing, because nothing is rarely nothing. It's the invisible work that makes everything else possible. I want to talk about something that might feel personal, the judgment you face, because if you're someone who prefers staying home, you've heard it all. You're boring, you're wasting your life, you're going to regret not going out more. Why are you like this? And those words hurt. Even when you know they come from people who don't understand, even when you're confident in your choices. Being misunderstood always stings, but here's what I want you to remember. People judge what they don't understand, and the people who can't comprehend your contentment in solitude are often the ones running from their own. They can't imagine being happy alone because they've never tried it. They've never given themselves a chance to discover what's actually inside them. Their judgment says more about their own fears than your choices. And let me be blunt about something. Some of those loud, always busy, never home people, they're exhausted. They're burned out. They're chasing something they can't name. They're terrified that if they stop moving, they'll have to face themselves. Your peace confuses them. Your contentment challenges their assumptions. Your ability to be still, truly still, feels impossible to them. So they label it, they mock it, they try to make you feel wrong for what they can't achieve. But you don't have to prove anything to anyone. You don't have to justify your choices. You don't have to explain why staying home makes you happy. You just have to know. And let that knowing be enough. Now, let's get practical for a moment because loving staying home doesn't mean you should never leave. Balance matters, human connection matters. Even the most introverted person needs some level of social interaction to thrive. The goal isn't to become a hermit. The goal is to honor your nature while still showing up for the parts of life that require presence. Here's what healthy looks like for someone who prefers solitude. It looks like knowing your limits and respecting them. It looks like choosing quality over quantity in your relationships. It looks like scheduling recovery time after social events. It looks like saying yes to the things that matter and no to the things that don't. It looks like understanding that you can love people and still need space from them. It looks like communicating your needs without apology. It looks like building a life that works for your nervous system, not against it. And here's what unhealthy looks like. It looks like never leaving because leaving feels impossible. It looks like losing relationships because you can't show up at all. It looks like using home as a place to hide from everything, including your own growth. It looks like letting fear make all your decisions. It looks like isolation that breeds more isolation. It looks like forgetting that the world outside has things to offer you too. The line between healthy solitude and unhealthy isolation is intention. When you're choosing solitude from a place of fullness, you're thriving. When you're defaulting to isolation from a place of fear, you're surviving. And surviving is not enough. You deserve more than survival. Now, let me give you some language. because part of why this is so hard is that we don't have good words for what you are. Introvert is close, but it's been so overused and misunderstood that it's almost meaningless now. Homebody sounds trivial, like someone who just likes their couch too much. Antisocial is inaccurate and actually refers to a personality disorder. Recluse sounds pathological. None of these words capture what it really feels like to genuinely, healthily, joyfully prefer your own company. So let me offer you something better. You're someone with a rich inner world. You're someone who finds energy in stillness. You're someone whose depth requires space. You're someone who has learned to be their own best company. You're someone who understands that presence doesn't always mean being present with others. You're not defined by what you avoid. You're defined by what you've cultivated, and what you've cultivated is rare. In a world of noise, you've built silence. In a world of distraction, you've built focus. In a world where everyone is looking outward, you've looked inward, and you've found something there worth staying for. I want to end with this. Your preference for staying home is not a phase you'll outgrow. It's not a problem to be solved. It's not a weakness to be overcome. It's a part of who you are. And while it might make certain things harder, like dating, like career networking, like maintaining friendships, it also gives you gifts that others don't have. You have the gift of depth. While others skim the surface, you dive deep. You have the gift of observation. While others are busy performing, you're watching, learning, understanding. You have the gift of self-sufficiency. While others crumble without external validation, you've learned to validate yourself. You have the gift of peace. While others chase happiness in the next experience, you've found it in the present moment. These aren't consolation prizes. These are superpowers, and the sooner you stop apologizing for them, the sooner you can start using them. So the next time someone asks why you're staying home again, you don't have to explain. You don't have to defend. You can just smile knowing what they don't. That home isn't where you hide from life. It's where you live it most fully. That your quiet Saturday isn't empty. It's exactly as full as you want it to be. That you're not missing out on anything. You're showing up for yourself. And that's the most important date you'll ever keep. You're not broken. You're not boring. You're not lacking something everyone else has. You're just wired differently, wired for depth over breadth, for stillness over stimulation, for peace over performance. And in a world that can't stop moving, that's not a flaw, that's a gift. Welcome home. You were always supposed to be here. If this video made you feel seen, I need you to share it, because somewhere out there, someone you know is wondering if they're broken for loving their own company, and they need to hear this too. Drop a comment telling me your favorite thing about staying home. I want to know what peace looks like for you. And if you want to understand yourself even more deeply, the next video is going to go even further. We're going to talk about why some people think too much, why their minds never rest, and why that's actually a sign of something powerful. Click it. You'll understand yourself better than you ever have.